Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for listening to this webinar. My name is Andy Los Reyes, and I'm going to spend the next few minutes speaking with you about strategies for selecting research mentors when applying to doctoral programs. And a lot of the material that I'll cover here is in the new book, The Early Career Researcher's Toolbox, which came out in April. So for the next few minutes, we'll do a few things. First, we'll talk about the value of mentors for your own doctoral training and future career. We'll talk a bit about how mentors vary from each other. They vary in a variety of different ways, and the ways in which mentors vary can have profound implications about for you in terms of the quality of your doctoral training and whether or not you can make the most out of your training. We'll talk a bit about strategies for finding mentors that fit your preferences, and by that I mean your learning style, the way that you acquire information, the way that the kinds of contacts you like to have with mentors. And then we'll round off by talking about some special cases regarding mentorship, some particular kinds of mentoring relationships that you might run into over the course of your training. And then we'll finish off by talking a bit about ABCT. So what do mentors do for you? Well, for one thing, they're your home base. Everyone who you look up to in this field, all the mentors you look up to, your current mentors, any future mentors you might have, all started out in the same way you will. They grow up with a mentor. They learn the tools of the trade in a mentor's lab or research team. All of us start developing a research interest embedded in the mentoring relationship, and so you learn not only the theories, the methods, the emerging research findings that inform your own thinking, but after your training, your mentor is also the person who vouches for you. As you look for your first job, they write you the letters of recommendation. They have the informal calls with prospective postdoctoral mentors or colleagues in a department that you'll wind up in. This person or people, because sometimes people have more than one mentor, follow you for your entire career. So this is a really important decision-making process. And here's the other thing. It's important for you to think about these mentoring relationships, not just because this person impacts you for your entire career, but in many respects, I'll make the argument that mentors vary from each other in a variety of different ways that you might not otherwise expect. And the reason why that's important is that oftentimes the characteristics of a mentor and the larger research environment can either gel or mesh really well with the way that you learn, with the kinds of environments you find stimulating. They can also clash. And so it's important to make predictions early on about not only how well you learn, but whether or not your learning style fits the learning style or the learning environment that mentors create for their students. So in many respects, applying to graduate programs is essentially a mission. Your mission during this process is to identify a mentor who fits your needs and also your overall learning style. And keep in mind here that we're talking about mentors here. At no point will we talk much about doctoral programs, even though doctoral programs, and not technically mentors, are where you submit your grad school applications. Here's an example that I often use to give people a sense of what I mean by this. Why are we talking all about mentors and very little about graduate programs? This is the homepage of the Large Hadron Collider, the CERN laboratory that's underneath Europe. It's a particle accelerator, an atom smasher, if you will. And the homepage of the CERN laboratory has a couple of basic questions that inform visitors of the website as to the overall mission of the Large Hadron Collider. What is the nature of our universe? What is it made of? These are two burning questions, and we'll talk about burning questions a lot over the next few minutes. These are burning questions that drive the thinking of everyone who works within the Large Hadron Collider. And we're talking about physicists, mathematicians, computer scientists, astrobiologists, So a whole host of different kinds of people who've gotten their training in very different disciplines, all interested in more or less the same kinds of questions. And so when students ask me, well, why do you spend so much time talking about mentors and less about graduate programs? My response is quite simple. If mentors are driven by questions and less about the discipline to which they're trained, do you really want to limit yourself to a particular discipline when thinking about the kinds of questions you find interesting and where you don't want to receive doctoral training? In many respects, what you look for in mentoring relationships is a mentor who doesn't exist, whose work doesn't exist on its own, but actually exists in a large, interconnected a universe of scholars who study related questions and produce findings in their laboratories that inform each other's work. And in many respects, mentors are kind of like galaxies unto themselves of interconnected work that then connects with mentors that presumably have other kinds of galaxies as well. Within each of these galaxies, you can think of different lines of research as kind of like self-contained systems, like solar systems, where you have an idea that drives the work. We call that a burning question. You have examples of how one tests that question. Why do people harm themselves? What are the most effective ways of delivering treatments? There are, the different studies are kind of like planets in the system. They're examples of how that burning question is instantiated in concrete pieces of scholarly work. And then gelling or grouping all that work together, the questions and the stars and the planets, are theoretical frameworks. They're kind of like our way of answering our burning questions. So if we had a hypothesis or an idea about the answer to our burning question, the theoretical framework fits in that way and serves as kind of like a gravitational force that hangs everything together. In many respects, when students are working within a mentor's galaxy, a key goal is that, in their training is to develop a solar system of scholarship onto their own, to sort of give people an idea that they too can develop independent lines of work. So each of these solar systems exists within a galaxy, and that galaxy revolves around a core idea or burning question. So as a first step, in this process, think about applying to graduate school like this. You're applying to mentors, not the programs. Applying to galaxies, not graduate programs. And when you think about it that way, as I was alluding to previously with the Large Hadron Collider, mentors whose work you find interesting can exist within one discipline or subdiscipline of an area, or indeed in entirely disparate fields. And when you think about it that way, it greatly expands your options, because you're no longer tethered to a particular set of programs. And also, this is in line with trends in scholarly work. You might notice in a lot of the research that you're reading nowadays that authors on the papers you're reading, they come from psychology, psychiatry, social work, nursing, pediatrics, and sometimes those co-authors are existing in the same teams. That's what we call team science approaches to scholarly inquiry. These kinds of approaches are standard in many of the STEM fields, and they're starting to become more pronounced or prolific within the context of social science disciplines like psychology. So thinking about these mentors this way is also consistent with where research is headed generally. So, how do mentors vary from each other? Well, they vary, as I mentioned before, in a variety of different ways. The first is that mentors vary considerably from each other in those burning questions that I was speaking about before. So as a first step, I encourage students to start your search by identifying prospective mentors or potential mentors who share topics of curiosity that are similar to your own. Start identifying mentors by their burning questions. So as you're reading through articles of the different kinds of people you might be interested in applying to work with, start asking yourself, questions, because oftentimes the answers to these questions aren't necessarily obvious. Like, put yourself in those mentors' shoes and ask the following questions. What do you think are the main questions that pique their curiosity? What are their burning questions? What kinds of aims do they tend to address in line with those questions? And to what degree are those burning questions similar to the kinds of questions you might find interesting or motivating to work on? You might ask, well, how do you discover these burning questions? Well, as I was alluding to previously, you learn a lot about these burning questions from reading mentors' work, so their articles. And I encourage you to sort of think of this as like a multi-phase process. Try to think of this as a habit that you'll form. And that habit shouldn't take up too much of your time per week. Something like 30 minutes, no more than an hour. Something you can implement week to week and stay and have it sustain within your weekly weekly habits. So let me start off that first week by taking a series of journals that oftentimes might publish work you find interesting. So in clinical psychology, journals like Annual Review of Clinical Psychology, Behavior Therapy, Behavior Research and Therapy, Journal of Consulting Clinical Psychology, Journal of Clinical Child and Adolescent Psychology, those different kinds of clinic-oriented journals, and look through tables of contents from those journals from the last couple of years to make sure you're constraining your focus on current research, the kinds of things that your mentors think, that prospective mentors are thinking about nowadays. As you browse through those tables of contents, you're probably going to find some titles of articles that you find interesting. We spend that second week reading the abstracts of the articles you flagged for the titles. Among those abstracts, you're going to find some that you find interesting enough where you might want to read the whole article, and others where you might not want to. Reading the full articles is something you'll do in week 3. And then in week 4, you're scanning the references of those articles you read. Because oftentimes, when prospective mentors are producing work, they're obviously telling you what they found, but they're also telling you about the people who inspired their work. And sometimes that's another way of finding mentors as well. If you do that on a month-by-month basis, over time, within a short period of time, you're going to notice some patterns in the work you identify. You're going to notice patterns in the burning questions that grab your attention. You're going to notice patterns in the authors of those articles. You're going to notice patterns in the articles cited in the reference sections of those articles. And then the questions that you're asking are fairly straightforward. Among those authors who you identify, do any of them serve as faculty in doctoral programs? And among those who are embedded in doctoral programs, are they taking a student in the year you're planning to apply? That second question you're answering for yourself in a combination of, looking at the author's website. Sometimes, many times, they mention in the website whether or not they're taking a student that following year. And if it's not there, then it's quite fine to send a quick email to a mentor asking them if they're planning on taking a student. So going through this process, reading these articles on topics that interest you will result in a list of mentors whose work overlaps with your own interests and the topics that you want to focus on during your doctoral training. But that's not going to be the end of your search. That's going to be those are going to be a list of potential mentors that you'll narrow down in your search. And the reason why is that these mentors, it's not guaranteed that they create a learning environment that's conducive to the kinds of ways in which you learn best, the kinds of ways in which you produce work in the most productive way. So we're going to go through some of those factors. Some mentors vary in a lot of other ways. And in the book that I mentioned, The Early Career Researcher's Toolbox, I present a framework that lists out a set of factors. They're not all the factors that mentors might vary from each other, but they provide a list of factors, some of which might be deciding factors in whether or not you apply to work with a mentor. And so we're going to discuss each factor, and then we're going to determine in the next part of the presentation how you'll figure out to what degree does the mentor's set of factors, or where they fall in them, match your own learning preferences and styles. So the first obvious place in where mentors vary from each other is in the size of their learning environment. So that galaxy, that research team that they've developed over time can vary, in several extreme ways. So there might be mentors for whom on their webpage is pretty clear they maintain a large, expansive environment with lots of different students, lots of different solar systems revolving around the galaxy at any one time. And on the other extreme end, you have more smaller, mentoring environments. Maybe the smaller ones are they're oftentimes related to how much experience that mentor has. So painting a broad brush here, larger galaxies tend to be developed only after years, sometimes decades of experience on the part of the mentor, and smaller galaxies tend to be produced by or maintained by mentors who have relatively less experience. And the reason why it's important to look at these at this factor is it's not just because of the size of the learning environment. It's also that sometimes the size is correlated with the mentor's overall style or approach to mentoring. That's also you can think of them as sort of extreme ends of a continuum, where some mentors have like a loose kind of supervision style where they allow their students a fair degree of independence to pursue the kinds of questions that they wish to have. There might also be vary on other kinds of factors that we'll go into later on. And on the other extreme end of the continuum is are some more tight supervision styles. Mentors who expect their students to study burning questions very similar to the burning question that they have. And although these factors, this factor is often correlated with experience, it's not perfectly correlated with experience. So some mentors, keep have a great deal of experience, but still keep a pretty small galaxy. Whereas others that might have relatively less experience have large expansive galaxies because something happened early on during the course of their development as faculty, like they secured a large grant that forced the galaxy to change quite rapidly, get big in size, sooner than is typical. Mentors also vary on time, and at least a couple of different ways. So some mentors spend a great deal of time with their students. They meet with them every for an hour a week, week-to-week basis, in individual meetings and group meetings. So you might find some mentors who might meet with any one student in a combination of individual or group formats for upwards of 2 or 3 hours a week. And on the other extreme end of that continuum are some faculty who spend relatively less time with meeting with their students. But it's important for you not to confuse or misinterpret quantity for quality. So sometimes a mentor spends relatively little time meeting with their students on a week-to-week basis, but the quality of that time, how efficient that time is for accomplishing training-related goals, is quite high. So there too, mentors who maintain loose versus tight supervision styles, can vary on these factors as well, such that, again, being very general here, mentors who keep a loose supervision style tend to be, high quality, on the time scale, but even if they're low quantity on a time scale. And in contrast, mentors who have a tight supervision style, tend to meet with their students relatively more frequently, and the quality, though can start off good, tends to get better over the course of time. there's a factor that's related to size, but isn't necessarily encompassed by size, and that's area. You think about area kind of like a room with a bunch of different pieces of furniture. You might have, some mentors have, pretty narrow kind of galaxies where their burning question is kind of like a coffee table or like an end table or something that, their students' questions are very similar to their own question, and other mentors have fairly wide area galaxies. They're like almost like a dining table, where at the center of that table is the mentor's core question, and the questions their students pursue can be similar to the core question, but some of them you see exceptions. They've actually studied things that are quite disparate from the mentor. And the last factor in the framework that I'm describing here focuses on resources. Resources, like time, vary in at least a couple of different ways. The most obvious ones, the tangible resources, consist of those material resources that students have available to them for conducting research within the mentor's learning environment. So things like access to hard-to-recruit clinical samples, access to archival data from past studies, equipment for collecting new data, for those students interested in research revolving around neuroscience, so time on high-cost equipment. And then you also have intangible resources. So any one mentor, obviously has these varies in terms of these resources, but a mentor can also have these kind of intangible resources that consist usually of networks of former students, collaborations with mentors, colleagues, and I like to put these intangible resources on students' radars in large part because when you go look for your first job, a postdoctoral fellowship, faculty position, or a position in philanthropic or nonprofit sectors, wherever your ultimate goals are, chances are it's been quite a long time since your mentor actually looked for work in the kinds of areas that you're interested in. And therefore, sometimes the former students of that mentor have can oftentimes provide you with a great deal of timely advice to complement the advice that your mentor will give you as you move on to your next steps. So those are the factors in which mentors can vary from each other. And the question is, well, how do you find out your preferences, and how do you overlay your preferences on the list of mentors that you've identified? The first thing is to start making hypotheses about your own learning style. So think about the ways in which you've learned. Think about the ways in which you tend to learn the best, and you'll see that people vary on how they learn best. So some people, tend to learn better when they're left to their own devices and given some instruction about what to do, but then sort of it's up to them to sort of figure things out independently. Some people find that kind of environment invigorating, and quite in contrast, that sometimes they find the more sort of looking over your shoulder, giving explicit direction is kind of stifling. And so that first style probably fits best with a mentor who has a more loose supervision style. And second, on the other extreme end of things, is people who learn best when given more explicit directions. And in that kind of context, they might find a loose supervision style kind of isolating in some way, or demotivating. Especially if you feel like it's tough to get to the next step because you're not getting enough advice commensurate with your learning style. Now, at no point will I ever say that these styles vary on the degree to which they predict a great career outcome. I mean, both of these kinds of styles are encompassed by people who have fantastic careers. But it's just a question at this point of seeing how your learning style fits with the learning environments of your prospective mentors. To get a sense of how mentors fall on these factors, the good news is that mentors all have track records, and that's track records are oftentimes a great deal of the information about those track records is publicly available. So by searching the mentors and searching the mentor students, you can start asking questions about that mentor's track record. Are the mentor students productive? Are they publishing with the mentor? If they're publishing, are they publishing work in a consistent area where it looks pretty clear that the student is pursuing a line of research, a coherent line of research that you can track? Are they given the opportunities to write training grants? So on the student CVs, do you see evidence of them preparing training grant applications? Among those mentors who've graduated a series of students, do you see evidence that the students have been able to successfully pursue employment post-graduation? So these kinds of questions are things you can answer by doing searches on your own. Now, a lot of that searching you're doing throughout the process, throughout the application process, and at some point, once you submit an application, maybe you have an initial phone contact with the prospective mentor, and you made that final cut of people who interview. Then you'll get invited typically to an interview to meet with the prospective mentor, other faculty in the department, and students current students in the program. And there you'll get a chance to ask questions about a variety of different aspects of the mentor's learning environment and style. What I always suggest to students is to think about ways in which you can frame questions where the answer to the question is some kind of objective indicator. The reason why I say that is that if you ask more qualitative questions like, what is it like to work with this mentor? In all likelihood, students are going to be less forthright in this context, because it's very easy if they say anything that negatively reflects upon the mentor. It's very easy for that bad news to get back to any one person. And so, what I suggest to students is come up with a series of questions for which the answer can be given in the form of some kind of concrete description about the mentor. And it's kind of like you're asking, questions that'll get you to the answers you want. So a great mentor does the following things: they meet students at the amount of time that would be good for you. Students can also tell you that they're working on things, that they're excited about working on those things. So just think about, the mentor that's right for me. What are the kinds of things that they would exhibit? What kinds of objective characteristics would they exhibit? And then ask questions to see if those fit. Now, one thing to keep in mind as you think about the STAR framework and where mentors fall in these factors is that as you go through and identify mentors and look to see whether or not those mentors fit your own preferences, you're going to find that no one mentor hits the mark on all the factors that are consistent with your own preferences, right? And it's kind of like the way people say, it's like when you're looking for real estate in a given city. So any given piece of property you might consider looking into can vary on how much it costs, how old it is, where it is geographically, and how big it is. And whenever you talk to any real estate agent, what they'll probably tell you is at some point the place you eventually move into is gonna be right for you on some of these factors and off for you on others. And mentors, I think, are kind of the same way. So in the book I mentioned before, I have a set of materials that facilitate coming up with the list of prospective mentors you ultimately submit applications to, and there's a table there where you can enter, the mentor's name, a brief description of the burning question, and then kind of like a plus or minus on each of those factors, kind of like products on like an Amazon page or something like that. So so this will give you a nice little shorthand to be able to compare and contrast mentors with each other. And in all of these different searches, you also want to make sure that there's proof that the mentor can provide mentoring for you. So among the publications that you'll see where mentor students are co-authors, what kinds of themes do you see? Do you see interconnected work? Any one students producing work that's similar to each other? Does each article look it's building on one another? Do students pursue work where it's clear that they took the lead on that work, or they that's typically indexed by students being first author on those papers. And then there's the question of what if a mentor doesn't have many students? Well, you can look to see if the themes of the mentors cut across their articles. You can also see whether or not you can see themes in the articles that the mentor's mentor has produced over time. And in all likelihood, even if a mentor hasn't had a great deal of experience or track record mentoring students, you can sometimes infer about their ability to mentor you from whether or not you see connectivity in their own work. And one thing to keep in mind also is as you're tracking down students and tracking down the mentor's record, focus on the outcomes of students. So looking to see whether or not they've pursued employment, but then also asking the question, among the outcomes of students who've worked with a prospective mentor, did they have a job? Did they wind up with a job that you would aspire to have, that you'd be excited to have? So I think going through each of these strategies will then give you some degree of confidence that you're walking into the application process with sufficient amount of information to make an informed decision, not just to who you apply to, but ultimately if you have options as to one of several mentors to apply to, which of these mentors is right for you. One thing to keep in mind that I wanted to make clear at some point during the presentation has to do with thinking about research programs. So, I might have mentioned before, I did mention before that if you can think about mentors as galaxies, lines of research as kind of like solar systems, students are oftentimes building these solar systems for themselves. The connectivity among the pieces of work in a solar system might not be apparent to you at the very beginning of your training, or even nearing the end of the training. So it's important to pursue work you find interesting, but it's also perfectly normal for you not to have it figured out, even towards even up until and towards the end of your doctoral training. All that's perfectly normal. The trick is to start off from the beginning, thinking about the conceptualization of your mentor's galaxy and your learning environment. If you think about the work in an interconnected way, and you start getting an idea of what are good models for interconnected work, then it becomes more likely that over the course of your training, you're going to be thinking about things programmatically. You're going to be thinking about things with an eye out towards the years ahead. I'm going to finish off our discussion of mentorship by talking about some special cases of mentorship that you might or might not encounter during your training. We mentioned before that not all mentors are created equally. We discussed a few different factors in which mentors might vary from each other, but there are some sort of special cases of mentorship that are also important to consider that we haven't yet got into. One is a circumstance in which you might have applied to work with a mentor. You wind up in a mentor's learning environment. And although you're getting a great deal of knowledge and expertise from working with that one mentor, there are certain bits and pieces of your training that consist of gaps that it'd be great to see if we can find a way to meet your needs in the in those areas. So sometimes that means identifying a co-mentor, a second training galaxy essentially, and that can take a couple of different forms. One way is that you might find a co-mentor in that same department or even within the mentor's collaborative network that you can fuse together with your mentor through a training grant application like a National Research Service Award from the NIH. Those formal mechanisms are great because when you put together the application, even if it doesn't ultimately get funded, it provides you with a place for you to conceptualize and make concrete the different pieces of your training plan that you think a co-mentoring galaxy could fulfill. But those relationships can also manifest informally as well. So if the co-mentor already exists on your campus or within your mentor's collaborative network, you might be able to sort of make use of that mentoring relationship even in the absence of any formal training relationship or training grant application. It's important to keep in mind that sometimes, even when you've done all your homework, even when you've asked all the relevant questions, it's quite possible you can enter into a mentoring relationship and realize at some point that there's some aspects of it that you might find inhospitable to your training. Maybe a co-mentoring relationship doesn't actually ultimately fulfill or fill the training gaps that you identified. Maybe you might find a mentor who's unwilling to be involved in one of these co-mentoring relationships, or there could be a personality clash that looks very difficult to reconcile. And it's important there to realize that oftentimes that has nothing to do with anything you didn't look into. It's just a function sometimes of just being in a relationship and realizing over the course of time that there are some issues that are difficult to grapple with. There are some different ways in which you can address these issues. One is seeking out advice from faculty on campus, or confiding or seeking advice from former students of the mentor, and whether or not there are some challenges that they encountered that might have been similar, and how did they address them. And then sometimes, there are a couple of different ways in which you can go about doing this, reconciling this. Is you could stick with that relationship and maintain it for the duration of your training. And if you do that, then it might be useful to seek out support from students on campus who might be similarly struggling with their own relationship with their mentor. And other times you might realize that it makes most sense to leave the mentoring relationship. And if that's the decision you wind up making, it's important to keep a few things in mind. And the most important of which is, if you're going to leave a relationship, oftentimes the grad program will require you to be in a mentoring relationship for you to maintain in good standing. So you want to make sure that you've identified a potential new mentor first, and then discuss with them about opportunities for potentially studying under them, and by extension, then leaving your current mentoring relationship. This is obviously easier said than done, because oftentimes that new mentor is in that same program, and in that same program, oftentimes no two faculty have the exact same interests. So that this oftentimes involves learning a brand new area of work, above and beyond the work that you've already grown to learn in your own mentor's learning environment. And then there, it's important to try to make sure that if you work with this new mentor, to then set expectations for the years ahead, and right from the beginning of the relationship. And then for other students, you might find that there are some mentors where, some mentoring relationships where you're their very first student, and other mentoring relationships where you're that mentor's last student, or one of their last students. Either one of these can be great training environments. So You know, if you're the kind of person that likes the idea of being involved in new and exciting things that are starting at the ground floor, you might really like being involved in that mentoring relationship, particularly if you also feel like tight supervision is the kind of learning style that's right for you, or it fits your learning style. And then, you know, if you might be with a mentor, might be one of the mentor's last students, and you like being involved with in those learning environments where you might find like relatively loose supervision styles. That's usually true of mentors for whom you have one of their last students. It's important to keep to try to look to see if there are any good signs that mentor is still planning on or excited about producing work in the years ahead. So are there examples from the last few years of their work that they're testing out new ideas, they're creating new lines of research, new solar systems? Is there evidence that they're forming new collaborations with other mentors, other scholarly galaxies? Is there evidence that they're still trying to learn new things? Because if that's there, then chances are that galaxy is still going to be quite fruitful for you. And then, you know, still other mentor relationships have less to do with the mentor, more to do with your own interests and motivations. So what happens, you know, if you're in a doctoral training program where research is a heavy component of your training, and you find out part of the way through that perhaps you don't want to pursue a research career? You know, then the question is all of this, time spent identifying mentors still worth your time? I would argue that it is worth your time for a few different reasons. Whenever you go to your next step, if it's a career where research forms very little job description, people are still going to want to know how you spent your time during training. And thinking about mentors, conceptualizing their work, conceptualizing your own work in a programmatic way is going to facilitate you essentially being able to tell the story of you once you go to look for work. And in addition to that, being able to develop those skills in communicating about what you've learned, communicating about your expertise, communicating about your goals and interests, those kinds of skills are going to generalize to many other different kinds of industries you might be a part of, or might be interested in being a part of. So I would still say that even if you find your plans changing, still keep this as a key component of your doctoral training. This is going to facilitate your moving forward to the next stages in your own career. So we've been over a lot of things here, but there are a number of other topics that we actually didn't go over. Things like well, how do you refine your list of mentors once you've already overlay them with your own learning preferences and style? What is it? How do you maximize or optimize the mentor relationship once you're in it? How do you produce work within that mentor relationship? How do you get it through the peer review process? And once you produce a series of pieces of work, how do you explain that work to others, like in the form of a talk, like in a job talk? So it turns out that the book I mentioned before, The Early Career Researcher's Toolbox, answers these and many other questions. I have a series of links here that provide you with a summary of or summaries about what's covered in the book, and also links to other relevant resources that have provided some additional details about the work. I'm going to end now with a word about ABCT. And I can tell you myself, I've been a member of this organization for the better part of 20 years. And so professional membership in organizations like ABCT can be helpful in a number of ways, not only for trainees, but also for early career, mid-career, and senior level professionals. ABCT offers numerous opportunities to deepen, expand, and enhance the quality of your mentoring circle throughout your career trajectory. For example, the annual convention is a valuable setting in which to reconnect with established mentors and develop new mentoring relationships. So trainees, don't be shy about seeking out established experts to discuss their research program or serve on mentored career development awards, such as the NIH's K Award or the VA CDA awards. These are important professional connections, and they can also be formed through special interest groups, or SIGs. SIGs are small groups within ABCT that share interests in particular topics. There are currently 40 SIGs, ranging from health psychology to Hispanic issues and behavior therapy to technology and behavior change. The SIGs meet every year and at the annual convention and are active throughout the year on email lists and websites where they share conversation and resources and work on projects to promote their interests. SIGs also have their own research poster events in addition to the general conference poster sessions. And so SIGs meet during the convention and students are welcome to attend. And if you found a mentor that goes above and beyond, don't hesitate to nominate them for one of several ABCT distinctions, such as the Spotlight on a Mentor program or the Standing Mentor Award. Issues related to mentoring are also regularly featured in ABCT's publication, The Behavior Therapist, which is distributed to each and every ABCT member and mailed out 8 times per year. We hope you take advantage of some of these resources and use them to help with your professional development. We also hope you'll always consider ABCT your professional home, a place where you can connect with others, get support for your professional development, and one day give back to younger generations of psychologists who will be where you are now. Good luck and best wishes in your career development. And thank you so much for taking the time.